The North had always known cold, but this chill was something older. It crept through the roots of the Weirwoods, ran beneath the stone bones of Winterfell, and slithered beyond the wall where the dead had once marched. Not the bite of winter, but something deeper, something ancient. Beyond the wall, the wind howled like a dying beast. Shadows slithered through the snow, shapes shifting in the gloom, neither living nor dead. Not men, not walkers, something older. "The ice is singing," came a terrified whisper. Tormund's weathered face grew grim. "Go, now. Tell Snow what we found," he commanded urgently. One scout ran. The others stood with Tormund, weapons ready, as dark shapes emerged from the blowing snow around them. The heart tree in Winterfell had stood for 1,000 years, its face carved by hands long turned to dust. Now its eyes bled. Drops of red sap like old tears slid down the pale bark, soaking into the earth where the bones of kings lay buried. The old gods had been silent for centuries, no longer. Jon Snow stood before the tree, his hand resting on Longclaw's pommel, his breath rising in mist. A streak of gray now runs through his dark hair. His face bears new scars, thin white lines across weathered skin. He had bled here once, a boy swearing himself to the Night's Watch, and now the wind whispered his name. Not Lord Snow, not Aegon, not the wolf or the dragon, just Jon. The old gods had no use for titles. They called him North. Jon looked up as he heard some footsteps moving through the snow. "Lord Snow!" the wildling gasped, dropping to one knee. "Tormund sent me, beyond the wall. Something stirs in the ice, something ancient." Jon's hand tightened on Longclaw's pommel. "And Tormund?" Jon asked, dreading the answer. The silence told him everything. Daenerys Stormborn sat on the Iron Throne, but it did not feel like victory. The city had been rebuilt, its scars hidden behind golden banners, and the pretense of peace. But the whispers had not ceased. A queen who had tamed fire could not be burned, but there were worse fates than flame. "Your Grace, perhaps we should discuss the reports from Dorne before..." Tyrion began cautiously, but Daenerys silenced him with a raised hand. The egg sat before her, resting in the cradle of dragon bone and silk. She had taken it from the ruins of Valyria, an ember of a lost age. "Blood of my blood," she whispered in Valyrian, her voice barely audible. The egg was warm, impossibly so, pulsing like a heartbeat beneath her fingers. The egg shuddered. A hairline crack appeared on its surface, seeping not with life, but with darkness. Tyrion took an instinctive step back, his face pale. "Heaven save us all," he breathed, horror dawning in his eyes. The rain fell like vengeful spears against the ancient stone of Storm's End, a fortress that had withstood sieges and sorcery and the wrath of gods. Within its walls, the forge burned hot as dragon's breath, defiant against the storm that howled for entry. The thunder roared overhead, like the ghosts of Baratheon's past, calling to their last living son. Gendry Baratheon had never been one for letters. The natural son of King Robert had learned his truths with hammer and steel, not ink and parchment. Words were wind, his father might have said, though Gendry had never known the man who sired him. Yet the letter lay before him now, its wax unbroken. The stag of House Baratheon pressed deep into the seal that had once meant nothing to him, and now meant everything. His bare chest gleamed with sweat, despite the chill that crept through the stone walls. Each strike of his hammer sang a song of steel and fire, a melody he understood better than the games of thrones and crowns. His body bore the marks of his journey, a scar across his ribs from the Brotherhood, another at his shoulder from the battle against the dead. The bastard smith had become a lord, but his hands remained those of a craftsman, not a nobleman. When Ser Davos Seaworth entered, he brought with him the wild scent of the storm. Rainwater dripped from his cloak onto the rushes, forming small puddles like the ones he had once sailed toy boats across for his own sons, long dead now. The Onion Knight had lost much, yet still he served. Still he carried messages that changed the fate of realms. "It bears the lion as well as the stag," Davos said quietly, his voice rough as the Shipbreaker Bay coastline. The old smuggler's eyes were solemn beneath his graying brows. He knew the weight of what he delivered. Gendry broke the seal with calloused fingers that had shaped metal but seldom parchment. His blue eyes, Baratheon blue they said in King's Landing, scanned the careful script, widening slightly as the meaning took hold. Jaime Lannister was dead. The Kingslayer had fallen with sword in hand, not kneeling, not begging, but laughing at the end, as if he had known a joke none of them could understand. Even in death, the golden sun of Casterly Rock remained an enigma, wrapped in legend and contempt. The man who had been both villain and hero had finally written his last page in the White Book. Gendry passed the letter to Davos, who read it with the practiced squint of a man who had learned his letters late in life. The old knight's weathered face revealed the gravity of what was written, of what was not said, but implied between the carefully chosen words. And now, with no true-born heirs left, a choice had been placed in Gendry's hands. The blood of the stag flowed through his veins, bastard-born though it might be. The hammer he wielded was not unlike the one his father had swung to crush the Dragon Prince's chest upon the trident. History had a way of finding patterns, of circling back upon itself, like a serpent devouring its own tail. "Come to King's Landing. Your place is here. A bastard no longer," Davos read aloud, his weathered voice grave with the weight of what these words truly meant. In the Game of Thrones, a bastard smith had suddenly become a valuable piece on the board. Men had died for less. Men would die for this. Gendry turned back to his work, with the stubborn set to his jaw that marked him as a Robert's son more surely than any royal decree. The raven came without warning, bursting through the window like a harbinger of darker tidings. It circled frantically before dropping a small scroll at Gendry's feet. "It's from Winterfell," he said, his voice dropping to little more than a whisper. "Jon Snow calls for aid. Something stirs beyond the wall." The storm outside seemed to pause, as if the very elements held their breath. Winter was coming, as the Starks had always warned. But this time, it brought something worse than snow. The great hall of Winterfell had witnessed centuries of war councils, of feasts and weddings and death sentences passed. Its ancient stones had absorbed the voices of Starks long dead, their warnings and their wisdom. Now it stood filled once more with the grim faces of those preparing to face an enemy few understood and fewer believed in. The North prepared for war once more, not against lions or wolves or dragons, but against something that had no name, no banner, no face. Jon Snow stood at the head table, his face as solemn as the carved heart tree in the godswood. The weight of the North rested on shoulders that had already borne too much. Death had claimed him once and returned him changed, though few could say how. Beside him sat Sansa Stark, her auburn hair catching the firelight like copper wire. When the messenger entered, the snow melting from his cloak left puddles on the stone floor like small, pale ghosts. The hall grew quiet as he approached Jon. "The Queen of the Six Kingdoms marches north," Jon announced, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent hall, "with dragons." Murmurs rippled through the crowd like wind through dry grass. Lords who had knelt to Starks for thousands of years exchanged glances heavy with meaning. Wildlings who had never knelt to anyone shifted uneasily, hands moving unconsciously to weapons. The dragons had come before, and the North remembered. Deep beneath the surface, where no light of sun or stars had touched for 10,000 years, Tormund Giantsbane was dragged through passages of ancient ice. The wildling's blood left a crimson trail on the translucent floor, steam rising where the hot liquid met the unnatural cold. Symbols older than the tongue of man pulsed with blue light as he passed, as if awakening to his presence. Tormund Giantsbane had seen death, had dealt it, had nearly succumbed to it more times than he could count. But this was different. The cold here wasn't natural. It spoke. It whispered in a language older than the first men, older than the children of the forest. It whispered of hunger. They were not dead. They had never been alive to begin with. They were the gods the children had worshipped before they carved faces into the Weirwoods. Gods older than time, older than memory. Gods who hungered for flesh and blood and souls. His captors' forms shifted like smoke in wind, sometimes resembling men, other times beasts unknown to any maester's bestiary. The passage opened to a vast chamber, a cathedral of ice that seemed to have been grown rather than carved. Crystalline structures rose like the spires of some mockery of a sept, and in its center stood a throne. Not the crude seat of iron that Southern kings squabbled over, but a living thing of ice that pulsed with the same blue light as the runes. Upon it sat a figure that Tormund's mind refused to fully comprehend. It wore the shape of a man, as a man might wear ill-fitting clothes. Its proportions were wrong in ways that made the eyes hurt to look upon. And where eyes should have been, there were only pools of liquid darkness, like holes cut in the fabric of the world itself. "Kneel before the old god," one of his captors hissed, its voice like the cracking of a frozen lake. Tormund spat blood onto the ancient ice. "I kneel to no man, no king, and no fucking god." The thing on the throne did not move, yet Tormund felt its attention shift to him. Felt it like a physical weight, pressing down upon his chest until his knees buckled despite himself. In the quiet chamber where Bran Stark's body rests while his mind travels beyond time, the barrier between worlds grows thin. Beneath ice that has stood for 8,000 years, ancient powers stir. Not the dead who march, but the gods who created them. Older than winter, hungrier than fire. Some truths change those who hear them. Jon's voice breaks the silence. "What did you see?" Trembling with the fear of a man who has glimpsed beyond the veil. Bran spoke. "The old gods do not forget. They do not forgive." His voice resonating unnaturally, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The ravens erupted into motion, wings beating against the cold air as they formed a living whirlwind of black feathers and sharp beaks. They circled the room once, twice, before streaming out the window into the night like a river of shadow. He turned his chair with a creak of wood and iron. In the moonlight, his skin seemed to glow with a faint blue luminescence, as if ice crystals had formed beneath the surface. Bran's eyes darkened, no longer the white of a green seer's trance, but his own eyes, yet they were changed. Something ancient looked out from behind them now, something cold and patient as the winter itself. "What are you?" Jon whispered, the question barely escaping his lips. Bran smiled, a terrible ancient expression on his young face that sent cold fingers of dread down Jon's spine. It was the smile of something that had learned to mimic human expressions without understanding their meaning. "I am what waits in the darkness between stars. I am what sleeps beneath the ice," Bran answered, the terrible smile playing across his face that had never belonged to his brother. "Bran Stark is gone," it said. "He's been gone for a long time. I merely wore his skin, as I will wear all of yours." "Gods who hungered for flesh and blood and souls, I am your god," it replied, as darkness deeper than night began to pool around the wheeled chair, rising like water from some bottomless well. "I am the only god that matters now." North of Winterfell, beyond the gift, past the shadow of the wall, lies a wilderness of secrets. They are few against the ancient many. Tormund, a free folk leader who knows the true north better than most, spits into the snow with a grin more grim than merry. "You lot really want to go poking the old gods?" he asks, the question hanging in the frozen air like a challenge. Jon Snow, a man with the weight of 2 worlds upon his shoulders, mounts his horse with the resignation of one who has never chosen the easier path. "Someone has to," he says simply, for in those 3 words lies the burden of his lineage, both Stark and Targaryen. Beside him, Arya Stark adjusts her sword with the casual grace of one who has danced with death and returned to tell the tale. Her smirk carries all the wild courage of her house as she quips, "You know me, I like a good mystery." They ride forth, unwitting pieces in a game older than the kingdoms of men. Deep below the frozen north, a network older than humanity pulses with renewed purpose. The old gods are waking, and they remember every promise unkept, every oath broken since the pact was sealed in blood.